Almost everyone knows the story of the first woman. She was named Eve. She was made from the rib of the first man. She ate the forbidden fruit, and for that single act, she has been blamed in one way or another for nearly everything that has gone wrong with humanity ever since. It is one of the most influential stories ever told, a story that has shaped how entire civilizations imagine women, obedience, temptation, and sin. But there is an older story, a stranger and more unsettling one that most people have never heard. According to an ancient tradition, Eve was not the first woman at all. Before Eve, there was Lilith. And Lilith did something Eve never did. She refused. The legend of Lilith holds that the first woman was not made from man and not made to serve him. She was created at the same moment as the first man, from the same earth, by the same hand, his equal in every way. And precisely because she believed herself his equal, she would not submit to him. When he demanded that she take the lower place, she refused. She would not lie beneath him. She would not accept that being created second in the telling or weaker in the body made her lesser in worth. And rather than yield, rather than spend her existence in a subordination she had never agreed to, she left. She spoke a forbidden word, and she vanished from the garden, choosing exile over obedience. For this, Lilith was not remembered as a hero. She was remembered as a demon. Over the centuries that followed, she was transformed from the first woman into the first monster, a creature of the night, a killer of children, a seductress who preyed on sleeping men, a figure so frightening that people wore amulets to protect their newborns from her. The woman who asked for equality became, in the imagination of the cultures that told her story, the embodiment of everything dangerous about the feminine. Her name became a warning. Her refusal became a curse. It is worth saying clearly that Lilith is a figure of folklore and legend, rather than canonical scripture pieced together over centuries from scattered fragments, demon lore, and the interpretive imagination of generations of storytellers. She is not a settled doctrine, but a shadow that gathered at the edges of a sacred text. And yet that is exactly what makes her so revealing. Precisely because she was never official, she shows us what people believed in the parts of their minds that doctrine did not reach. Legends are where a culture keeps its honest fears, and Lilith is one of the most honest fears humanity has ever recorded about the prospect of a woman who would not obey. Her story has survived for one simple reason. It refuses to stay forgotten because the question at its heart has never been settled, only suppressed. This is one of the oldest and most revealing stories humanity has ever produced because of what it quietly admits. It admits that long before the modern age, people understood exactly what a woman demanding equality would mean, and they were terrified of it. They imagined that first refusal so vividly that they had to turn the woman who made it into a monster, because a woman who would rather be exiled than ruled was, to them, almost unthinkable. Lilith is the shadow that Eve was created to replace, the first draft of woman that had to be erased and demonized so that a more obedient version could take her place. To understand Lilith is to understand something fundamental about how cultures have treated female autonomy, not as a virtue, but as a danger to be contained. Her story is not really about a demon at all. It is about what happens to a woman who says no, and about why that single word spoken by a woman to a man at the very beginning of the human story was so frightening that it had to be buried under thousands of years of fear. The strange thing about the Lilith legend is that it did not emerge from nowhere. It grew, in part, out of a genuine puzzle buried in the opening pages of the most influential book in Western history. If you read the creation account closely, you find not one story of the first humans, but two, and they do not entirely agree. In the first telling, God creates man and woman together in the same moment, both made in the divine image, with no suggestion that one is made from the other or ranks above the other. In the second telling, which follows shortly after, the order is different. The man is formed first, and the woman is made afterward from his rib, as a companion fashioned for him. For centuries, careful readers noticed this discrepancy and asked the obvious question: if man and woman were created together in the first account, and then woman was created from man in the second, were there two different creations? And if so, who was the first woman, the one made equal? And at the same time, before the one made from the rib, out of that question, ancient interpreters spun an answer. The first woman, the one created equal, was Lilith. The second, the one created from the man to be his helper, was Eve. The two contradictory verses were not a mistake. They were the trace of two different women. This reading transformed a textual puzzle into a profound story about power. Lilith was the woman of the first creation, made from the same dust, equal by origin. Eve was the woman of the second creation, made from man, derived from him, secondary by design. And the difference in how they were made became, in the legend, the difference in how they behaved. Lilith, knowing herself equal, refused to submit. Eve, made from man and for man, was cast as the one who could be tempted, who could fall, but who remained within the order of obedience even in her sin. One woman left, the other stayed, and the culture that told the story decided very clearly which one would be remembered as acceptable. It is worth pausing on what this means. The legend essentially proposes that there were two possible models for the first woman, and that humanity kept the obedient one and demonized the equal one. Lilith had to be removed from the story, not because she did anything wicked in the beginning, but because she represented a version of woman that the existing order could not accommodate, a woman who came into being as an equal and insisted on being treated as one. She was not cast out for a crime. She was cast out for a claim, the claim that she was not less. And there is a quiet irony in which woman, the tradition, chose to keep Eve, the one made second, derived from the man, fashioned to be his helper, became the universal mother, the woman whose name everyone knows. Lilith, the one made first, equal from the same earth, became the demon almost no one was taught about. The order was reversed in memory. The woman of the first creation was pushed into the shadows, and the woman of the second creation was placed at the center of the human story. To be first in the making and last in the remembering is its own kind of erasure, and it happened to the very first woman before the story of humanity had properly begun. And so the story of the two creations becomes a story about a choice made not by God, but by the people telling the tale. Faced with two visions of the feminine one, equal, and one subordinate, the tradition enshrined the subordinate one as the mother of humanity and turned the equal one into a demon of the night. The contradiction in the text became a doorway, and through that doorway walked one of the most enduring symbols of female defiance the world has ever known. The fullest version of Lilith's story comes from a medieval text, though it draws on far older traditions, and the heart of it is a single, startling confrontation. Lilith and the first man, created as equals, immediately fall into conflict, and the conflict is about position in both the literal and the symbolic sense. The man insists that he should take the dominant place and that she should lie beneath him. Lilith refuses. "We are equal," she says, "for we were both created from the same earth. Why should I be the one to submit?" Neither will yield, and in that small domestic standoff, the entire history of a struggle is compressed into a single scene. What happens next is the decisive act. Lilith does not argue endlessly, and she does not eventually give in. She utters a name, the secret and unspeakable name of God, a word of such power that it is forbidden to pronounce, and with the speaking of that name, she gains the power to leave. She rises into the air and flies away from the garden, abandoning the man, the paradise, and the role she had been assigned. She chooses the unknown wilderness over a comfortable subordination. She would rather have freedom in exile than security and submission. It is one of the most radical choices in all of mythology, and it is made by a woman in the very first chapter of the human story. The man the legend says, complains to God that his companion has fled. 3 angels are sent to bring her back. They find her by the sea, in the wild places, and they deliver an ultimatum: return or suffer a terrible price. And Lilith refuses again. She will not go back. Even when threatened, even when the cost is made monstrous, she does not return to the place where she would have to be less than what she is. Her defiance is not a single impulsive act. It is a position she holds, even under threat. Even when holding it will damn her, she chooses herself repeatedly, knowing exactly what it will cost. The names of the 3 angels sent to retrieve her were remembered and written down, and for a long time they were inscribed on amulets hung over the beds of mothers and newborns, charms meant to keep Lilith away. There is something quietly astonishing in that detail. For centuries, in countless households, people carried small written reminders of a woman's refusal, talismans whose entire power depended on the memory of the night she flew to the sea and would not come back. The culture tried to use her story as a protective spell against her, and in doing so, it kept her defiance alive, copying it onto charm after charm, generation after generation, unable to stop retelling the very rebellion it feared. And it costs her everything, at least in the eyes of the story, because she will not return. The legend says she is condemned. Her own children will die. She will become a creature of the night, an exile forever, cut off from the human family she might have founded. The punishment is severe and deeply telling because it is a punishment designed to fall on a woman specifically, to strike at motherhood, at belonging, at the very capacity to create life. The message encoded in the curse is unmistakable. A woman who refuses her assigned place will be denied everything that the culture defines as womanhood. Defiance and barrenness are bound together as if to say that a woman who will not submit cannot truly be a woman at all. What is remarkable, reading the story now, is how little Lilith actually does that, is wicked. She does not lie, steal, or harm anyone in the beginning. Her entire offense, the original sin for which she is exiled and demonized, is that she claimed to be equal and refused to act as though she were not. Everything monstrous that is later attached to her, the child killing, the seduction, the demonic night flying, comes afterward as the consequence and the justification of her refusal. The monstrousness is not the cause of her exile. It is the costume the culture dressed her in to explain why a woman who said no had to be feared. Lilith did not begin as a fully formed demon, and tracing how she became one reveals the machinery of fear at work. Her roots reach back into the ancient Near East, into Mesopotamian traditions of night spirits, wind demons, and figures associated with storm sexuality and the dangers that threaten mothers and infants. These older spirits were shadowy and frightening, linked to the vulnerable hours of childbirth and sleep, to the terrors that lurked at the edges of the household. Over centuries, these scattered fears gathered around a single name, and that name attached itself to the rebellious first woman of the creation legend. The result was a figure who carried both stories at once, the woman who refused and the demon who haunts the night. As the legend developed, the demonization intensified and specialized. Lilith became, above all, a threat to children. She was said to prey on newborns, to steal the breath of infants, to be the unseen cause when a baby died in the night for reasons no one could explain. In an age before medicine could account for the deaths of children, Lilith became the name for that grief and that terror, and households hung amulets and inscribed protective charms to ward her away from their cribs. The woman who had been cursed with the death of her own children became, in turn, the killer of everyone else's. Her exile from motherhood curdled into a war against it. Her name even surfaces fleetingly in the older scriptures themselves, in a passage describing desolate places where wild creatures gather in the ruins, among them a figure of the night. Translators across the centuries struggled with what to call her, rendering the word as a screech owl, a night creature, a night monster, or simply leaving the name Lilith to stand. That single ambiguous mention, set among the haunts of the wilderness, gave the later legend a foothold in the sacred text and bound her forever to the imagery of ruins, darkness, and the untamed places beyond the edge of the settled world. She became the spirit of everywhere that human order did not reach, which is to say, everywhere a woman might go when she refused to stay home. She also became a creature of dangerous sexuality, a seductress who visited men in their sleep, who drained their vitality, who represented desire untethered from marriage, family, and male control. This is a familiar transformation, the same one that has fallen on countless real women throughout history. The independent woman, the woman outside the household, the woman who answers to no husband, is recast as a sexual threat, her autonomy reimagined as predation. Lilith, outside the garden, free and ungoverned, could only be understood by the storytellers as something hungry and destructive, because they had no other category for a woman who belonged to no one. Notice the pattern in all of this, because it is the same pattern that demonized so many powerful women throughout actual history. The threat is always reframed as monstrosity. The woman who refuses submission becomes a danger to children, to men, to the natural order itself. Her independence is rewritten as malice. Her refusal to occupy her assigned place is transformed into an active campaign against everyone who stayed in theirs. Lilith is the mythological template for a move that real cultures would make again and again, taking a woman whose only true offense was autonomy and burying that autonomy beneath a mountain of invented wickedness. And the demonization served a purpose beyond fear. Lilith, as a monster, became useful. She became the dark example against which obedient women could be defined and warned. Be like Eve, who stayed, who was forgiven, who remained within the household even after her fall. Do not be like Lilith, who left, who refused, who flies shrieking through the night forever, cut off from love and children and home. The demon was a teaching tool. Every frightening detail attached to her name was also a lesson aimed at living women, a quiet instruction about the catastrophe that awaited any of them who might be tempted, as Lilith was, to believe that they were equal and to act on the belief. Strip away the night flying and the child stealing and the centuries of accumulated horror, and you are left with the thing at the center of the Lilith legend, the thing that all the monstrousness was built to disguise. Her defining act, the one from which everything else flows, is a single word: no. Lilith is, at her core, the woman who said no. And the entire vast apparatus of her demonization exists to explain why that no was so terrifying that it could never be allowed to stand as what it actually was: a reasonable refusal of an unreasonable demand. Consider how much weaker the story would be if it admitted the truth plainly. The first woman was created equal, was told to make herself less, and declined. Put that way, she sounds not like a demon, but like someone entirely sympathetic, even admirable, and that is exactly the problem the legend had to solve. A woman whose only act was to refuse subordination cannot be punished and feared on those grounds alone, not without exposing the injustice of the demand she refused. So the refusal had to be buried. It had to be overlaid with crimes terrible enough that the original act of defiance would be forgotten and the woman could be hated for monstrous deeds rather than admired for a principled stand. This is what makes Lilith such a revealing figure. Her story is a confession written into mythology, an admission of just how threatening female autonomy was understood to be. The cultures that told this story did not imagine that the first woman's rebellion would be small or containable. They imagined it as cosmic, as a fracture in the order of creation itself, requiring the intervention of angels and the invention of curses. They understood at some deep level that a woman who claims equality is not making a minor request. She is challenging an entire structure, and the structure knew it. The intensity of Lilith's demonization is a measure of how dangerous her simple no was felt to be. It is telling, too, that the legend gives Lilith no chance at compromise that she finds acceptable. The angels do not offer her equality if she returns. They offer her only the original terms, submission or punishment, and she chooses punishment. The story cannot imagine a resolution in which her demand is simply granted, in which the man agrees that they are equal and the conflict dissolves. That possibility is unthinkable within the world of the tale, and the unthinkability is the whole point. The culture could imagine a woman rebelling and being destroyed for it far more easily than it could imagine a woman rebelling and being proven right. Lilith had to lose, because a Lilith who won would have unmade the entire order the story existed to defend. And the danger was specific. Lilith does not threaten through violence or seduction, not originally. She threatens through refusal, through the demonstration that submission can be declined. A single woman who successfully says no and walks away is more dangerous to a system of obedience than any number of women who rage and fail, because she proves that the no is possible. She is a precedent. If the first woman could refuse, any woman could, and so she could not be allowed to stand as a successful rebel. She had to be transformed into a cautionary monster, her exile reframed not as freedom but as damnation, so that her refusal would look like a catastrophe rather than a choice. There is a terrible honesty in this once you see it. The legend of Lilith is the story of a culture looking directly at the possibility of female equality at the very dawn of its imagined history, and recoiling from it so violently that it spent millennia turning the woman who embodied that possibility into the most feared demon it could conceive. Her monstrousness is not really hers. It is the shape of the fear she provoked. Lilith is what female autonomy looks like when it is seen through the eyes of a world that cannot tolerate it, and so must call it evil in order to survive. There is a deeper psychological pattern at work in the story of Lilith and Eve, and it is one that recurs across countless cultures and countless myths. It is the splitting of woman into two opposing figures, the obedient and the defiant, the pure and the dangerous, the saint and the shadow. Eve and Lilith are not really two characters so much as two halves of a single idea, the acceptable woman and the forbidden one, set against each other so that the boundary between them can be policed. Every culture that fears female power seems to produce some version of this pair, and the pair always does the same work. It teaches women which half they are permitted to be. Eve is the woman who stays. She errs, she falls, she is punished, but she remains within the system, subordinate even in her sin, and so she can be forgiven and become the mother of humanity. Lilith is the woman who leaves, who refuses, who chooses exile over obedience, and so she can never be forgiven, only feared. Between them, they map the entire territory of how a woman is allowed to exist. You may be flawed, you may even sin as long as you remain within your place. What you may not do, the unforgivable thing, is step outside the structure entirely and refuse to come back. Eve's fall is tolerated. Lilith's freedom is not. This splitting serves a purpose that goes beyond either character. By dividing the feminine into the saint and the shadow, a culture gives itself a way to praise some women and condemn others using the same standard, the standard of obedience. The good woman is the one who submits gracefully. The bad woman, the witch, the seductress, the demon, the shrew, is the one who does not. And because the shadow figure is always available, every real woman can be measured against her and warned. Step too far, ask too much, refuse too loudly, and you risk sliding from Eve into Lilith, from the forgivable into the monstrous. The shadow exists to keep the living in line. Psychologists who study myth have long noted that the figures a culture banishes into its shadows are rarely its weaknesses. They are usually its disowned strengths, the parts of human nature that a society finds too threatening to claim openly, and so projects outward onto a monster. Lilith carries the disowned strength of the feminine, the assertiveness, the refusal, the appetite, the will, all the qualities that the obedient ideal of womanhood was built to exclude. By placing them in a demon, the culture could hold them at arm's length, could call them evil and dangerous, while quietly admitting, through the sheer vividness of the figure, how much power those qualities actually contained. You do not build a monster that elaborate around something you genuinely believe is weak. What is striking is how unstable this division actually is, because the shadow figure is never as simple as the culture pretends. Lilith, the supposed demon, is also the only character in the story who refuses to lie, refuses to submit to injustice, and holds to her principles even under threat of damnation. The qualities that make her a monster, her courage, her self-respect, her refusal to be diminished, are qualities that would be called virtues in a man, even heroism. The shadow is dark only because of where the light is being held. Move the light and the demon begins to look like the one figure in the story with genuine integrity. And the saint begins to look like a study in survival through compliance. This is why figures like Lilith never quite stay buried. A culture can demonize the woman who refuses, can curse her and fear her and warn against her for 1,000 years, but it cannot fully destroy the appeal of what she represents, because the thing she represents is simply selfhood, the refusal to be made less than one is. The shadow keeps its power precisely because it holds the part of the feminine that the official story tried to discard, the part that says no, that walks away, that would rather be free in the wilderness than comfortable in a cage. And eventually, in some later age, that discarded part tends to come looking for its name back. And that is precisely what happened to Lilith after thousands of years as a demon, a child killer, a figure of terror hung on amulets and whispered about in the dark. She was, in the modern age, reclaimed. Women looked again at the old story and saw something the original tellers had tried to hide in plain sight. They saw that the first monster was also the first woman to demand equality, that the great demon of the night was underneath all the horror, simply someone who refused to be told she was less. And they took her name, the name that had been a curse, and made it a banner. Lilith became a symbol not of evil, but of independence, of the woman who will not submit, of the refusal that started it all. This reclamation is more than a curiosity. It is a demonstration of how the demonization of women works and how it can be undone. For most of history, Lilith's story was told by the people who feared her, and in their telling, her refusal was a catastrophe and her freedom was a damnation. But a story can be read against the grain. The same events, looked at with different eyes, tell a completely different tale, not of a demon who abandoned paradise, but of a woman who refused an injustice at enormous personal cost and was slandered for it across the centuries. Nothing about what Lilith did changed, only who was telling the story and what they were willing to see. And this is the lesson that reaches beyond Lilith to every woman who was ever turned into a monster for refusing her assigned place. The witch, the shrew, the seductress, the hysteric, the difficult woman, the demanding woman, the woman who would not be quiet or small or grateful. All of them were, in their own way, told a version of Lilith's story, recast as dangerous for the crime of autonomy. To reclaim Lilith is to suspect that wherever a culture has called a woman a monster, there may be, buried underneath, a woman who simply said no and was punished for it, and slandered into something fearsome so that her no could be safely ignored. There is something almost unbearably old about this, and something almost hopeful. The first woman who demanded equality was demonized, and it took the better part of human history for the world to begin reading her story differently. That is a long time to be a monster for the crime of self-respect. But the rereading did come, and when it came, it revealed that the fear was never really about Lilith at all. It was about what she proved, that the no was always possible. That submission was always a demand and never a fact of nature, that a woman could look at the order of the world and decline to accept her place in it, even at the cost of everything. Perhaps the deepest irony of the whole long history is that the thing Lilith was punished for is the thing every fully realized human being must eventually do. To become a self at all is to learn to refuse, to draw a boundary, to say that some demands will not be met, no matter who makes them. The culture that demonized Lilith was demonizing in a woman the most basic act of personhood, and reserving that act for men alone. To reclaim her is not to celebrate defiance for its own sake. It is to insist that the capacity to refuse, the no that protects the self, belongs to everyone, and that a world which calls it monstrous in women has misunderstood something essential about what it means to be a person at all. In the end, Lilith's single word turns out to be the foundation of something the cultures that feared her could never quite stamp out. No is the first act of a self. It is the word by which a person draws the line between what they will accept and what they will not. The word that says, "Here is where your authority over me ends." The first woman is remembered as a demon because she spoke that word at the very beginning to the very first demand and would not take it back. But strip away the centuries of fear, and what remains is not a monster at all. What remains is a woman standing at the dawn of the human story, refusing to be made less than she was, and choosing, with full knowledge of the price, to belong to herself. That was her sin. It was also her freedom, and it is why thousands of years later we are finally learning to say her name without fear.